This is Golden Years, a roadmap to navigate retirement with Mark Cordner, the podcast.
If you're a listener on this show, you have heard us talk about risk tolerance so many times. And how do you define it? Well, here's Carrie Hannon with Yahoo Finance.
It's really how much you can stomach when the markets drop. Are you going to freak out? Are you going to panic? So this is sort of this moment where you have to sort of take a breath and really be honest with yourself. How can you handle the drops? And we see these all the time. And can you wait it out for it to come back? So if a 10% drop is going to make you crazy, then you're not very risk tolerant. But it's important to understand that because this is going to tell you how much you want to be in the stock market, invested in equities, or in cash and bonds, which is a little more steady, and you're not going to have these ups and downs.
All right, so that's the definition that she's throwing out there. But I wonder, how do you go about measuring a client's risk tolerance? Mark, walk me through this process.
Wow, it is a process, and candidly, it varies by every person. I like her language there about the stomach factor because that's really how I speak with people as well as, what can your stomach handle? Because roller coasters go up and roller coasters go down. Most people don't mind when they go up. It's the down part that's hard. And so if you can't sleep well at night, you've got to change the portfolio. And you've heard me speak often about the fact that we need to have some money in the market, some money out of the market. And if we balance that properly, people shouldn't have to worry about the day-to-day swings because the market is going to ebb and flow just like the ocean, and that's just the nature of it. But we have a number of tools to help people. And the first tool, of course, is just talking. It's understanding what people's experience has been, how they've responded to past periods like 2008, for example, how that unsettled them or not. And of course, we have to look at the timeline because more than anything, it's a function of time. The one thing we don't have when we're older and approaching retirement is time to recover. Time is the thing that's lost. And so 20-year-olds can look at this a lot differently than 60-year-olds. If you got a short-term horizon before you're going to actually need to start tapping into your money, then we got to make sure some of that is secure and out of the market. So I've always advocated a two-pocket approach, some money in the market because we've got to outpace inflation long term, and then some money out of the market to be able to deal with the more short term, the next 5 to 10 year kind of scenario. And so it's a process. We actually have some wonderful tools. The computer age is so wonderful compared to 30 years ago when I started. We can do assessments now. We can take people through different models and basically ask them how they would respond to various situations. And we actually have a scoring mechanism so we can not only gauge their relative risk tolerance on a scale of 0 to 100, for example, but we can actually match that score against a portfolio that would behave within the parameters that they are comfortable with. So if they're comfortable with a potential 10% loss, then there's a portfolio for that. If they're comfortable with a potential 30% loss, well, there's a portfolio for that. The more loss we're willing to endure, potentially the greater returns we have at the back end. But I always go back to time. It's a function of time more than anything. And those of us who are getting a little bit older have to think a little bit differently than we did when we were in our 20s. And unfortunately, we don't see that being the case. Most people coming out of retirement have got the same 401k portfolio they started with 20, 30 years ago, and they're far, far too aggressive for that stage of their life. And when we show them that, then it's very eye-opening. We can then help them make the changes. So that's why we invite people in to do the portfolio analysis. We could do a risk analysis for you and help you get clarity on what you need versus what you can actually stomach.
And Mark, just kind of on this topic, I was talking to a friend of mine the other day. Her mother just literally recently retired, had another meeting with her said financial advisor, brought up the stock market, brought up the tariffs, brought up, of course, how we're all kind of waiting for the other shoe to drop because the market's been doing so well. And, of course, brought up concerns about this administration, how it's kind of a snowball effect on all the rest of us. And she said her financial advisor, when it came to talking about risk and her involvement in the market, blankly looked at her and said, "I just don't know what to tell you." I mean, is that a normal response? What do you think about that?
Yeah, I'm not sure I know how to process his response there. I agree if what he meant by that was he does not have a crystal ball on the future and on the market and on the fact that we're now in a global economy with a gazillion different moving parts, and therefore cannot predict the future, then I would agree with him because that's simply being honest and being humble because truly God alone knows what's going to come in the market in the future. But we also know from past experience and from really powerful academic research that we can design portfolios that fit a person's stomach, their risk tolerance, and their needs. And sometimes what people need to do and what they're comfortable doing are two different things. And so we have to find a balance in there. There's not a simple answer. I mean, there absolutely is a science behind this. Really, if you're in the market, you need to be there for, 10 years or more. These are not short-term propositions. So we shouldn't be worrying about the next 10 days. We should be thinking in terms of the next 10 years. True investors think in terms of decades, not days and weeks. And so, again, that's why I always have to go back to that two-pocket strategy that I talk about. Some of our money has to be safe outside of the market. That's what gets us through the volatility of, current politics and things like that. But the long-term money, the money that has to outpace inflation and grow so that we have future income, that needs to be involved in the market in one respect or another. And so it's a balancing act, and everyone's answer is different.
You heard us a few weeks ago talk about the One Big Beautiful Bill. There's a new aspect that's included in it now called the Trump accounts. These are brand new. They're tax advantage investment accounts pre-funded with $1,000 of what they call seed money for every child born from the beginning of 2025 through the end of 2028. Now, listen, if your kids were born before 2025, they're still eligible for the IRA-style accounts. They just don't get the $1,000 seed money. And the government's idea with all of this is to get kids into saving and investing earlier in life. So when they turn 18, they can turn around and use that money for qualified purposes like college or even buying a new home. Now, this might sound good on paper, right? It might sound great even as I'm talking about it, but there's got to be some financial advisors like yourself, Mark, that aren't necessarily a fan of these Trump accounts. Where do you stand here?
I have mixed feelings as well. I think it's more a political ploy than anything, certainly the naming of the account. I'm a big advocate, of course, in teaching our children to save, and I can't say that I was entirely successful as a parent in that. I think most parents struggle with these ideas. So I love the idea of talking as a nation and as a community about helping our children understand money and saving for the future. And as far as if that's the government's role to seed that may be taking me down a political road that as a libertarian I probably don't want to comment on on the radio. But, I don't know if that's the government's role. But basically, I think this has been misunderstood. What they're doing is they're giving free money out, $1,000, that can grow tax deferred. They keep using this phrase that it's tax-free until it's withdrawn. Well, that's the same thing as a tax-deferred IRA. It just means when you withdraw it, you're going to deal with the taxes then. That's not a bad thing, and it's wonderful if the children are contributing. My experience is that children aren't even aware of this unless the parents are talking about it, and children are not contributing until they're actually in their earning years, at which time a Roth IRA would accomplish the same objectives, perhaps better, in my opinion. So my real bias, if I'm going to be really brutally honest, is that most Americans haven't prepared well enough for their own retirement. And so this conversation about, doing things for our kids or maybe even focusing too much on paying for their college, I think sometimes gets misguided. Kids don't have to go to college. Kids don't have to have cars when they're 16. We do have to retire in the sense that our health will force us to at some point if we want to or not, or economic circumstances may. And so my personal bias is let's focus on the parents' planning. And if we need to pull money out of the parents' account to pay for things like college or whatever the family priority is, well, we can do that. And if there's extra money, let's do it for the kids. So on the Trump accounts, as we call them, I think it's probably a better thing for the grandparents to be involved in than the parents. But I just say kudos. Anytime we can start talking about living on less than we make and saving for the future, I think that's a step forward. And so I want to always be positive and commend those who are at least trying to get that conversation going. If that's what I would recommend for each of my clients, is a totally different story.
Nowadays, it seems pretty much everywhere you look, there's some kind of scam, whether somebody texts you and says like, oh, you're due for this bill. There's something going on now with the DMV. They try to tell you your license is expired or what have you. There's always somebody out there scheming. And it seems that the fraudsters, they're becoming more sophisticated. Listen to this. A guy named Scott who got a call from his bank, or at least he thought it was his bank, with knowledge of all of his recent debit transactions. The caller said that the card had been compromised and sent someone to his house to collect it. That right there is red flag number one for me. They snipped the card in half at the front door, and they actually left with the broken card. So in less than 2 hours, over $20,000 vanished from Scott's account. Losses from scams reported by Americans over 60 soared to nearly $700 million last year alone. And now the bad actors are armed with AI. That's a big thing here. Audio, video, things that are fake. You hear about them all the time. Somebody calls and says they've been kidnapped in another country, and it sounds like your niece or nephew or your grandchild. Next thing you know, you're wiring money. These things are crazy. So when clients encounter something that sounds too good to be true here, and it just doesn't seem right, are you often their first go-to call before they make a big mistake, Mark?
I don't think we really are their first go-to call, although I did have an experience with this just a couple weeks ago. I mean, hopefully there's family members around to help. I think of this experience a couple weeks ago where I have a client who, we met her about 4 years ago, and then she moved back east to be near family, and it turned out the son was financially abusive of her. And so she moved back here to Vegas, and then she called me about 2 weeks ago and told me that she had this great opportunity that had come up, and just her language, she's in her mid to late 80s, and she's single, obviously no family around her because the son was being abusive of her finances. So she's back here living in assisted living basically on her own, and she calls me, and it turned out that, once we finally, 15 minutes into the conversation, she finally admitted that she had won $34 million. And I thought, excuse me? and I say this because then I went into son mode. I was Papa Bear mode kind of thing. It just made me so angry because there's a warm place in hell, I think, for people who take advantage of the elderly. And she was supposed to meet this guy at the bank, so we invited her to meet at the bank next door to us, where I would be there with her and the bank officers to greet this gentleman and kind of vet the situation. And long story short, the meeting never happened, and she went silent. She realized that it was a fraud. But it's just crazy, when you hear these things and you think, someone comes to your door, that red flag you mentioned, people ought to know better, but sometimes they don't. We get dependent. We come from an era, a time when people are more trusting. And so I just pray that there's family members and friends around to help us. I just think it's so important that we have family meetings, that we're open with one another. We actually have a habit in my office now where we're having clients sign what we call authorized letters, which basically give us permission to reach out to family members when we think that one of our clients is going to be abused, or if perhaps, as is more commonly the case, there are cognitive problems that develop, early signs of dementia or early onset Alzheimer's, things like that. And so we've actually got another case right now where we're, within the next week or two, we're going to have to meet with some dear friends of mine's children and talk to them about how some changes have happened. And so, these are hard issues, and I just say, build your tribe around you. Get your family, get your friends, get your church members, whoever you make as your family, involved in your life. Don't live in this silo alone where people can take advantage of you like that, because it is a sad day and time that we're in when people do things like this. And my personal belief is it's going to catch up to them. And again, warm place in hell, it's deserved. If you take advantage of people's life savings like that, that's. You reminded me of another situation, but I was in the hospital with my son recently. He was in there for a week, and the nurse came in and heard what I did, and she opened up to me about how her husband had taken his life savings. They had actually done a very good job. He was in a blue-collar occupation, but had been a tremendous saver. Had saved over $500,000, for his age, that was quite impressive. Long story short, he learned about this wonderful crypto opportunity and yada, yada, yada. You can see where the story goes. He ended up losing everything, and so we had to talk about ways, to recover that. So again, the message is, if something sounds too good to be true, it probably is. It probably is, and follow your gut. Vet things. Check out the advisors that you're working with. Check out the organizations that are soliciting you, because once that money's gone, as in the case of this dear nurse, she was wonderful. And yet my heart was breaking because there was really no magic wand that I had to be able to rescue them from losing literally decades worth of hard-earned savings. These things happen.
Investment advisory services offered through Golden Years Financial LLC, a registered investment advisory firm. Insurance is offered through Golden Years Insurance Services. These firms do not provide legal or tax advice. Consult your own legal and tax advisors before taking actions that may have tax implications. Investing in securities involves risk, including the potential loss of principal. Insurance contracts' principal protection is based on the claim-paying ability of the respective insurer. None of the information contained on this website shall constitute an offer to sell or solicit to buy a security security or insurance product. The information and opinions contained on this site or requested from this site are provided by third parties believed to be reliable, but accuracy and completeness cannot be guaranteed. They are provided for informational purposes only and are not a solicitation to buy or sell any of the products mentioned. Any media logos and/or trademarks contained herein are the property of their respective owners, and no endorsement by those owners of Mark Cordner, Golden Years Financial, or Golden Years Insurance is stated or implied.